Hello and welcome to the Genuine Learning blog. My name is Melissa Galasso and I'm kind of excited to talk to you about Q1 2021 in review. I don't know where the first quarter of 2021 went. It was definitely a blur, but as with precedent, we always like to talk about what got issued and final standard during the quarter. And this was an exceptionally slow quarter, and not that anybody is really sad about that. We've had a lot of other things going on between some federal stimulus money happening, changes to tax rules, and just generally speaking, a lot of things that are just not normal going on right now. We've been pretty busy dealing with just other stuff. So the fact that the standard setters weren't prolifically filling us with standards is probably not a bad deal. So we're just going to look at the very few standards that were issued this quarter. So first up is the AICPA, and we've already actually covered this one in a separate blog. They did not issue any SASs, SARs, or SSAEs, but they did issue a third-party assessment engagement. And we talked a little bit about what this is, what do you have to do in terms of independence requirements for these new types, or not really new, just a clarification of when you're performing these, what are the requirements. So that was a nice clarification. If you didn't take a look at that blog yet, I recommend you take a look at it now if it impacts you. The FASB did get out three different standards this quarter, including the much awaited ASU 2021-03. And so we'll just kind of take a look here. The first one was a scope to reference rate reform, obviously with LIBOR going away. And with the changes happening in these IBORs around the world, we've had already ASU 2020, it's 2020-04, which addressed the actual reference rate reform. And there were some questions about scope and things that were not directly impacted by reference rate reform, but there were a lot of indirect. So they do clarify that many of those will meet the requirements for some of those exceptions and practical expedients. ASU 2021-02 was some practical expedients for the franchise world. And this is in particular related to revenue recognition and how many performance obligations do I have? So they gave some nice practical expedients. This was one of the reasons why ASU 2020-05 was issued delaying revenue recognition. This was the original, if you look at the exposure draft, one of the reasons why they were delaying it for very specifically franchisors that were private entities, but ultimately ended up giving the full extension for all private entities who hadn't issued financial statements yet. So they did finally get that standard out, so franchisors can have that practical expedient in implementation. The third one was probably the highlight of the quarter. They promised it would come out before the end of the quarter, and they made it by the skin of their teeth. They issued it on the 30th of March. And this one's really big. This is accounting for an alternative for goodwill impairment. And so a lot of entities going back to March probably had a triggering event, whether it was the near zero interest rates, whether it was being forced to close or work from home or really change your operations. There were lots of potential triggering events, and many of them lasted for several months. However, many of these entities got creative, rebounded, and by the end of their fiscal year might no longer have, they might have returned, sales improved. We started to see movement sort of back to normal. And so the current standard said, well, if you had a triggering event, you have to look at it at that point in time, even if you don't make quarterly financial statements. And so they're going to give a private company exception here, allowing private entities to kind of pick when they do that triggering event evaluation, making it a little bit easier. Because for many entities, that's sort of like old news. And to put old news into financial statements is probably not the best for users. So they want it to be as up to date as possible. So we have been very excited about this standard. It was first brought to the FASB by the AICPA's Technical Issues Committee. And so they did a great job explaining some of the issues out there and using some great examples in their presentation. So super excited to see their impact come through as a final ASU. So bravo to them, and thanks for hopefully making that a little bit easier for all of our private companies as well as some not-for-profit entities. All right, Gatsby didn't issue anything in this quarter, so again, not a big deal. They did issue the proposal for compensated absences, but they did not issue a final standard this quarter. So that is a wrap on the final standards issued in Q1. Hopefully, we'll see a little bit of pickup in certain areas, but again, we don't need it to go back full steam. There's plenty of stuff going on right now in the world. So thank you guys so much for joining me, and I hope to see you on a future blog. Have a great day, guys. Bye-bye.